Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad you're here. I am Evelyn Moon. I am Director of Education at Good Grief, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. And I really do appreciate all of you for joining us in what has turned out to be a pretty icy and snowy day here in New Jersey. For those of you who are not in New Jersey, maybe in a warmer climate, I'm very jealous at this moment. But let me tell you a little bit about today. This info session is part of our Good Grief Schools webinar series. And every school year, we bring you content, experts, and information as a way to extend the work that we do outside of our centers and into the virtual space. So this session is being recorded. You'll be able to access it later on our YouTube playlist. But anyone who's attended today's live session will receive a certificate of attendance within the next 48 hours from Good Grief. So for those of you who are new to Good Grief, welcome. We're so glad that you found us. We are a nonprofit organization. We have been around in New Jersey since 2004, and our mission is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. So for most of the organization's history, we've been providing free and unlimited peer support programs to grieving children. We start as young as 3 years old and we go all the way through young adulthood. So we'd like to say from 3 to 30. And we do this in our centers. We have one in Morristown and one in Princeton. But in recent years, our work has been growing, and that's through education and through advocacy, because we want to provide training and curriculum and resources to a variety of settings: schools, hospitals and healthcare, funeral industry, corporations, really any space where there's a need to empower professionals, parents, or the broader community to support the needs of children, families, and friends who are facing loss and adversity. So here's a big picture view of all the work that we do at Good Grief. We have our family support services. This is what we call Nights of Support. This was our initial work that we do at Good Grief in our centers. Grieving children and families come to us from September through June every other week to receive free and unlimited peer support programming. We have Good Grief Schools, which you're going to learn a lot about today in today's session. We have something called Grief Expression Summer Camp. We were in person this summer and it was a great success. We have our Good Grief Spring Institute. That is another professional development opportunity. I will tell you more about that at the end of our session. We provide professional development and training, parent education, and the Youth and Funerals Initiative. So who am I? You're stuck with me for the next hour, so I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. My name is Evelyn Moon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the Director of Education at Good Grief. And I've been working with social emotional learning focused programming for the last 10 years. These are just some fun facts, some other things to know about me. I am the mother to a 7-year-old child, soon to be 8-year-old. She would probably correct me right now. She's very, very close. I'm a product of the New Jersey Public Schools from K to 12. I'm a 3rd generation Rutgers graduate, so I'd like to joke it does not get more Jersey than that. 3 generations at good old RU. I did hop over the river to get my master's from NYU, and I am a huge Star Wars fan. So if we have any other Star Wars fans in the house, may the force be with you, my friends. And I'm obsessed with reading thrillers and suspense novels, even if they keep me up at night and mess with my sleep. I just love them. So now you know a little bit about me, but I want to know who you all are. So if you're able, hop in the chat, make sure you send it to everyone and not just the hosts and panelists so we can all see you, but just say, you know, where you're from. Are you from a school or an org, another state? I'm just so curious to know where people are coming from. And again, if you're in a warmer climate, please feel free to brag. Oh, hello, welcome. Got India, South Brunswick, Las Vegas, Bergen County. We got some teachers. Welcome. We love our educators. Oh, hi, Dawn. Yes, Sutter County. Hi, Harlem. Fellow Star Wars fan, Jersey born and bred. We have so much in common going on here. Social worker from Pennsylvania. Amazing. Hello, everyone. Yes, please put your information in the chat. Feel free to keep the chat going. I love a good pop and chat conversation happening. Hello, hello. Yeah, so just because I've moved on, don't think that means you have to stop talking to one another. Please continue to share. I definitely want to know who you all are. So this slide represents all of the offerings that we have for Good Grief Schools. So unlike our nights of support, I'll say up front, Good Grief Schools is a fee for service that we provide either through school budgets or grants, unlike our family support services, which is completely free and unlimited and covered by very, very generous donors. And I will break down all of these components that you see here on the screen as we move through our time together today. But before we jump into the how of Good Grief Schools, I'm going to talk about the why and what the need is that we are filling here. So first, we're going to explore that multidimensional nature of the grief experience. We're going to identify various losses and adversities that students face and how it impacts their behavior, their learning, their relationships, their well-being, and of course, learn about the Good Grief Schools programs. We're going to really highlight how these programs can support school communities to grow into cultures of empathy that foster resilience and relationship building. If you are new to Good Grief, which I think some of you may be, you should know that we are big fans of, number one, practicing what we preach when it comes to mindfulness and grounding techniques. And number two, we are big on ritual. So rituals serve a function of establishing a sense of community and belonging through traditions. And ritual is important, whether you're virtual or you're in person. They help with managing transitions. So we are all, I would guess, coming from somewhere, maybe even multitasking in this moment. And we'd likely have somewhere to be or something to do after this. So it's really important for us to mark the beginning and the end of our time spent together today. So we will have a closing ritual at the end of our time to check out. And just to kick things off, our opening ritual is going to be a mindful grounding technique, just to center ourselves in time and in space. So let's just get comfortable. You know, if you are seated, maybe find your weight on your sit bones, wiggle a little bit back and forth. We don't want to be too overarched in the back, and we don't want to be sort of slumped over. Just find a nice, comfortable way to sit. And if it works for you, you can close your eyes. I mean, no worries, it's a webinar. No one can see you. But I'm just asking you to go with me on this one. You can close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to take just a few deep breaths, really low commitment, but we're going to breathe in through our nose to the count of 3 and then out through your mouth to the count of 3. So we're going to go in and out. In and out. Third one, in and out. Now I'm going to ask you to take your biggest, deepest breath of the day, and don't be afraid to make some noise as you let the air come back out through your mouth. So in and out. And I know this can feel super cheesy to some people, but I personally find that with each breath, I get a little more relaxed, a little more present. I feel tension leaving my shoulders. I don't know about you, I'm a shoulder tension person, a jaw tension person. And the great thing about deep breaths is that they require no equipment, no special space or circumstances. We can access this at any time, whenever we need it. So this is something that we do here, different types of mindful breathing and grounding techniques. It's something that we practice with the kids and families that come into our centers, and it's baked in to the lessons and the curriculum of all of our school programs. So this is the broad view of Good Grief's vision to build resilience. So through our education and advocacy and the peer support work that we do in our centers, we focus on 2 main components. The first is building up the capacity of those supportive caregiving relationships and teaching our kids adaptive life skills. So those caregiving relationships include any grown-up in a child's life. So of course, the parents and caregivers in the home, but we're looking at educators, coaches, mentors, And adaptive life skills are things like mindful awareness, emotion regulation, healthy coping, identifying purpose, building up empathy, and more. So this is our vision and our goals broadly for all of our Good Grief Schools programs, because really we want to empower the school community. So that's educators, parents, and students with grief-informed training, programs, and resources in order to build up whole community resilience. We want to increase the use of SEL skills. So we want to build up those skills in the classroom so that they can have real life applications later on. We want to enhance the feeling of feeling connected to school, especially for those who are facing loss and adversity, because that could feel very isolating. We want to increase the help-seeking behaviors among students who are struggling. So can they identify resources and know when to ask for help? And build that shared language and educator confidence in their ability to support students who are facing loss or adversity. So let's take a look at the loss and adversity that we're supporting in our programs. So the last few years have been a time of great uncertainty and stress and loss for so many of us. And I think we all know this has been going on for much longer than any of us initially had anticipated. There's a rising death toll, different types of loss, there's grief that's continuing to rise, and there's this sense of loss from experiences that are not death too. There's this sense of loss related to the reality we currently live in, loss of jobs, businesses closing, changes in health, racism, oppression, and the loss of what we all once sort of understood was normal. And sometimes I think it's really easy to forget this state of heightened stress and uncertainty that we've been living in. And that has real consequences for us and for our kids. It really does feel like a lot of us have just been living day to day, kind of waiting for the next set of bad news to roll in. And we can find ourselves stressing about and focusing on things that we may not have any immediately control over. I'm sure you know this, doom scrolling is real. It is so real. And it's part of a stress loop that we can find ourselves kind of caught up in. So whether it's the pandemic or politics, I mean, we're in this highly polarized climate and living in a state of uncertainty that leaves us feeling stressed and sometimes guilty about our stress. Do you ever feel that way? Because maybe you feel, oh, other people have it worse. But I want to tell you that does not make it any less real or any less present for you. I would argue that all of us and all of our kids have experienced some form of loss and adversity during this time. And without question, some of our children and families have been impacted far more significantly than others. So this is about the students, the kids, it's about your colleagues in schools, but this is also about you. Your losses matter. Your stress and state of uncertainty also matters. And the Good Grief Schools programs take a holistic approach. We have a curriculum to support the children, but also professional development for school staff and parent education, because we're all in this state of stress and uncertainty together. And it's only by working together that we will build resilient communities and grow from this. So this next slide is from Judys House, the JAG Institute, and every year they estimate rates of childhood bereavement in the United States and also break it down state by state and county by county. So if you love numbers, this is a great resource for you to go down sort of data rabbit holes for sure. I highly recommend you check it out, judyshouse.org. From their work, we know that approximately 1 in 14 students will experience the death of a parent or sibling by the age of 18. And this is strictly the death of a parent or sibling. It does not take into account other caregivers or other significant relationships in a child's life. Also, this more than doubles by the age 25. So we're looking at 1 out of 7 people will be bereaved. That is 13.3 million bereaved young people. Here's a look at sort of nationally rates of childhood bereavement. So we know children are grieving in your schools, in your communities, but many times they are the forgotten mourners. The grown-ups around them might not know how to support them, how to show up for them, or they might even feel uncomfortable engaging with a grieving child for fear of making it worse somehow. I would say it's our own stuff internally, many times too, can act as a roadblock to really being present for another person who is in pain, but especially with kids. Sometimes I think we worry that we might make it worse by talking to them about it. But these kids are there, and we can help them in a variety of ways in the home and in school. So I keep talking about grief. Just want to make sure we're all operating from the same understanding and vocabulary. So grief is a multifaceted response to loss. It's a compilation of emotions and more. You know, if I asked you, what do you think grief is? A lot of people kind of go right into that emotional zone, but it is also intellectual, spiritual, and physical. It's universal and natural and healthy, because grief enacts a series of responses that helps individuals to adapt after loss. Grief serves a purpose. And many tend to still think of grief as a series of stages that you need to go through, and you have to do this work to find acceptance and healing and closure to move on with your life. But this is simply not the experience of the families that we work with in our centers. We see that grief is this sort of winding, nonlinear, and lifelong process. So when we say that grief is multidimensional, we say it is physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. You feel it with your whole selves. So for those of you who are still tuned in and not multitasking and fully present, I'm going to ask you to use the chat. What ways would you say grief shows up physically? If you had to think of ways that grief shows up physically, yes, headaches, fatigue, muscle pain, those stomach aches. Yes, it can affect your sleeping. So you might find yourself having some insomnia or maybe oversleeping. It can affect your eating, so that decrease or increase in hunger, those digestive issues. And that heightened stress response, your fight, flight, or freeze, crankiness. Crying. Absolutely. And when we say that grief is emotional, I feel like that's sort of, like I said, the zone that we tend to land in first when we think about emotions. So when I say the emotions of grief, what comes to mind for you? What emotions do you associate? Crankiness, purposefully capitalized. Thank you. Anger, the feeling that something is missing. We have our friends from Inside Out showing us a few of the emotions of grief. You could see joy, sadness, disgust, anger, fear. And I mean, you could feel relief and then feel guilt about your relief. You can feel sadness and you can feel joy. You could feel sadness and anger. There's this full range of emotions that occur with grief and loss, and many times they can happen hand in hand, side by side. So when we say grief is intellectual, I mean things like we start asking really big, difficult questions, like what happens after we die? And for children, it's really about understanding the reality and permanence of the loss. I mean, among a whole other host of intellectual responses. And we say that grief is spiritual. It's intensely spiritual. What else could make us really sort of face our own mortality and the fact that we all do die than experiencing the death of someone in our life? And when we say that grief is spiritual, we're talking about meaning making. It's all about making meaning out of the experience. Your relationship with a higher power, you might find yourself questioning it, maybe even leaning into it for the first time. Same thing with cultural or religious traditions. And a big one is questioning identity and sense of purpose with grief, with loss, with stress. We might find ourselves saying, well, what does this mean? Who am I now? I feel like the pandemic had a lot of people thinking about that. The great resignation, the great reshuffling, the great whatever, a bunch of people were becoming entrepreneurs or deciding to be stay-at-home parents, or suddenly we really had to look at our values, what was important to us, and how we wanted to show up and who we wanted to show up as. It's a fairly typical response, the spiritual meaning-making response. What is my path or purpose in life now? Absolutely. So grief and trauma reactions are very unique. They're very subjective. Grief doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in relation to everything else in your life, your experiences, your worldview. And there are a number of factors that will influence and determine your response. So when we're thinking about the nature of the loss, that matters. There's all different ways that people can die. The age of the griever also factors in exposure to a violent death, if there was suffering involved, the nature of the relationship with the deceased. People that we have all types of relationships with die. And that can mean a variety of different things for how we respond to it, sometimes in surprising ways. Prior health matters. I'm talking about your mental health as well as your physical health, culture, religious traditions. Your socioeconomic status affects things because that can affect your access to support when you are grieving or when you are facing an adversity or a challenge. So the broader landscape of adversity, I've been using this word adversity, and we know that beyond just loss from death, our young people face significant loss and adversities every day. And these experiences impact school and their health and their overall well-being. And when I'm talking about, and this is by no means a list of every single adversity a young person could experience, but we're looking at things like addiction, abuse, losing a home, broken relationships, their physical and mental health, loss of safety, security, innocence, domestic violence, incarceration, poverty, neglect, any kind of family separation, and racism and oppression. So the CDC would consider these all to be adverse childhood experiences, or an ACE. And the CDC did an adverse childhood experiences study, and they found that 75% of all children will be exposed to at least one ACE. And half of those kids who have been exposed to one ACE will then go on to be exposed to at least 3 more. And I'm sure many of you have seen this in your work. Childhood adversity just has a way of piling up in a person's life. So we as the caring adults, we must consider the whole picture of a child's experience inside and outside of the classroom. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we uplift students who are going through adversities and challenges such as these, which ties into the work and support of Good Grief schools. And some might wonder, how does this matter? What does adversity do to a person? So there are emotional, mental, and physical consequences. And when we're talking about these types of adversities, the long-term chronic stress that experiences like these really can create, this is especially true because the body never has a chance to reset back to its baseline. So we can remain in a state of heightened stress, just constantly detecting and reacting to threats. So here are some of the risk factors that kind of go up with being in this state of heightened stress from exposure to certain types of adversities. So we're looking at physical health, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, increased mortality risk, learning and growth, so developmental delays, cognitive function, poor performance in school, and for mental health, chronic stress, anxiety and depression, addiction, suicidal ideation. This list, again, comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And we can see that there's this heightened risk factor to the physical, the learning and growth, and the mental health as well, when kids are exposed to these long-term chronic, or what we call toxic stress. So toxic stress, that's the chronic long-term stress, and it's essentially an excessive activation of the body's stress response system. And it can lead to long-lasting wear and tear on the body and brain. So this is from the Center on the Developing Child over at Harvard, and they said the effect would be similar to revving a car engine for days or weeks at a time. I know that can feel very gloomy, but there are things that we can do and behaviors that we can teach that can help. So I just want to ask you, because I'd love to introduce this by having you think through your own life experiences. How do you act when you're stressed? How do you act when you're lonely or sad? What's happening to you physically, intellectually, emotionally? How are you responding? Feel free to pop that in the chat. Irritable, isolation, can't remember things, can't make decisions. Yeah, some people do get more withdrawn. You get kind of foggy, forgetful. Yeah, yeah, that brain fogs. That's so super real. Yeah, crankiness, all caps. That is the only way I want to see crankiness. Extra quiet, yeah, getting withdrawn, more hyper, lack of focus. With me, I get a lot of physical things. Again, I think I shared this earlier. The shoulders start going up, the jaw starts getting tense. And then I'm wondering, why do I have a headache? Yeah, can't sleep, interrupted sleep. Body gets all knotted up. Yeah. Oh, yes. Uh, so this is us. We're adults. We very easily, yeah, the appetite, anxiety, headaches. Yeah, we can easily sort of jump to our experiences of how our behavior changes. And then I'm sure we probably have our own ways that we cope. How have we developed ways to help support ourselves when we start to feel that way? And what are some things that you do when you start to feel stressed, when you start to feel lonely or sad? What are the things you do to care for yourself physically, emotionally, intellectually, even spiritually? Yeah, you talk to a friend. Yeah, exercise. Exercise is a big one. Pray, eat, watch TV, clean. Yeah, clean. Sometimes it's nice to kind of get control over the things that you can control. Yeah. So we have our ways of coping. A lot of times our kids do not. We've got years of experience and some time to figure out what works and what doesn't work, whether we do it or not. Sometimes we know that there's things we should be doing to care for ourselves, especially in moments of intense stress, and we might not always do it. Wouldn't it be wonderful? Yes, have someone just come over and clean when we feel stressed out. Unless when the people feels a little withdrawn, in which case you might not want someone in your house, and that's all good. But yeah, the way kids have some changes in behaviors, it's very similar. The fear, the nervousness. I think I saw almost all of these: anxiety, depression, becoming withdrawn, more impulsive, difficulty concentrating, overreacting to situations. I saw that they might become aggressive, and then those stomach aches and headaches. And there's so much crossover, I think, between what we have adults have identified as responses and what the kids experience. The difference being years of us developing either healthy or sometimes unhealthy coping mechanisms, but we know what we can do to support ourselves a little bit better. This, of course, has an impact on learning. So with that brain fog that we were talking about, that difficulty concentrating, difficulty retaining and processing information, they might become overly reactive to exams or assignments, normal stuff that's happening in schools, and then difficulty making and carrying out plans. I don't know about you all. I know I'm not a kid, but this impacts me big time. If I get too overwhelmed and too stressed out, I just have trouble making and carrying out plans, even when they're plans that I know in the long run might actually benefit me and make me feel a little bit less stressed. I have sort of this failure to launch sometimes. So what we want to do to sort of balance the scales a little bit, we have these things that are impacting our kids, that are impacting ourselves. What do we do to tip the scales more towards resilience and being adaptable? Because what we want to do is build up those adaptive life skills of students to help them become more resilient, to bend but not break. But what is resilience? So in English, the word resiliency refers to the property of elasticity or springing back, much like a rubber band after it's stretched. And it's the capacity of a dynamic system to adapt successfully to disturbances that threaten system function, viability, or development. So as a living system, a human individual could be described as resilient when showing a pattern of being able to adapt, recover in the context of potentially destabilizing threats. And it generally refers to making those positive adaptations in the context of risk or adversity. Yeah, bending without breaking. We see rubber bands, the ball imagery a lot. I don't love the idea of bouncing back, but bouncing forward, making those adaptations in the context of risk and adversity. So I want to show this slide again. We've now defined grief, we've defined resilience, and we've looked at the need that young people have. And this goes beyond just loss from death. I think we can all understand that, especially now, our young people are carrying tremendous amounts of loss, stress, and grief. So what can we do? We as the caring adults in a child's life, how can we support? And one way we do this is through our fee-for-service programs that are part of Good Grief Schools. And these programs rely on those same two key pillars of supportive relationships and adaptive skills that Good Grief builds everything on. So yes, there are a lot of factors that determine a person's resilience. The genes that you're born with form a starting point to how you react to risk and adversity. But the environment you're in determines so much. And resilient children have an adult, but usually multiple adults in their lives who are supporting them by teaching and modeling adaptive life skills, who are listening. We hear this so much with the kids in our centers. They just want adults to listen and other people to listen. And they have these adults who are acting as an empathic presence for the child. So the vision of Good Grief to build resilience starts with those supportive relationships. Like I said, it's any adult, but it's also supportive relationships with their peers as they practice these skills together, as they learn to support others in their classroom, but also outside of the classroom. So let's dive into our programs. Let's get into the good stuff. The first one is Good Grief Groups. So this first program really stems from the work that we've been doing since 2004 with grieving children and families. It's a grief peer support program for students who've experienced the death of an important person in their life. This can be a family member, a friend, a relative, a teacher, anyone. So unlike the work that we do in our centers, which focuses on a child who's lost a sibling or a caregiver, this is really any death that is affecting the child. It does not have to be a recent death. To qualify, the student just needs to express that it was an important relationship and that they really need support. Typically, older kids can opt in. I've seen a lot of high schools do this where students can opt in, but with the littles, they're usually more voluntold by some combination of school staff and parents. So what we do is we train whoever is most appropriate in the school to run the group. Many times that's the school counselor, psychologist, social worker, nurse, or an educator in the building. And Good Grief Groups really does take the work that we do in our centers outside of our walls and then embeds it directly into the school community. We essentially train the trainer through a virtual onboarding, and then we give all the trained staff access to curriculum so they can implement the program for their community. A school can run as many groups as needed, as many times as they want throughout a school year. But we recommend at least 3 students take part in a group. 2 is just a conversation, but 3 really does feel like a group. But we recommend no more than 12, about a dozen, due to the nature of the activities. There's a lot of opportunities for processing their grief, either through conversations or through activities. We want to make sure that they have time to share. And this curriculum runs for 9 sessions. And we recommend training at least 2 adults in your building. And these are the program goals of Good Grief Groups. So we're looking at meaning and identity, identifying healthy and unhealthy environments, who are your support systems, competency, self-advocacy. Oh, I don't know why 7 came up before 6. Communication, prevention, resiliency, continuing bonds, and peer support. So this is a program. Oh yeah, age groups. We have an elementary, and then we have one that is written for middle school through high school. So they do sort of parallel activities and lessons, but they're written for different developmental ages. So elementary and then middle and high school are sort of in their own separate curriculums. And the idea is we want to normalize talking about grief, death, loss, and a program like Good Grief Groups can shift the culture of a school for the better. Any other questions about Good Grief Groups? We'll also have Q&A at the end, but any wonderings about this particular program that I can answer for you right now before you forget? Yes, yeah, we can talk about cost, absolutely. So what we normally do is we will meet with whoever the decision maker is, and we put together a proposal. The training is all done online, and the cost really depends on, how many schools a district is running it in and how many people they want to have trained. So the cost can sort of move depending on how big we're going. There's a little bit of a discounted rate once you get over a certain amount of people being trained in a school as well. And yes, we do everything by Zoom, and all of the curriculum, the lesson plans, everything is available digitally. Also in the survey that I'll send you, at the end, that there's an option for you to have one of us reach out to you, so that way we can put a meeting on your calendar to talk more about this. Time commitment for people being trained, it's about a 5-hour training. We either do it in one 5-hour chunk or in 2.5-hour sessions. Yes, you would be the one providing the group in the school. So we would train you with everything that you would need, hopefully to co-facilitate. It would be nice to have 2 people with you, although some very small schools will just have one person who's trained to do the work in their building. And we would train you to take our 9-session curriculum and run it with your students. Of course, with our support, we have monthly check-ins, and I'm always available to answer questions. What type of background? I would say this one, we tend to get more, like I said, counselors, social workers, psychologists, nurses, but sometimes educators as well, so teachers. The school really is the one to determine who would be the most appropriate people to be running a program like this. But I would say a lot of times it leans more towards those with that sort of professional background. Yes, I think I answered everything. Let me just double check the chat. But yes, this is essentially a train the trainer program for schools. So what if you are looking not for grief support, but more broad programming to focus on building resilience in students in your school communities? Then we would really need to talk about Roots to Resilience. So Roots to Resilience is all about building up those adaptive life skills and peer support to strengthen resilience and to overcome adversity. So this program has a much broader application because it is not a targeted intervention. Someone does not need to have experienced a death to participate. So it can be applied to entire grades or grade bands to build up that resilience muscle of your students. This program is separated a little bit more. So this program, the curriculum is K through 2, then 3 through 5, 6 through 8th, and 9th through 12th. So typically schools will select a grade within the grade band to receive the curriculum. For example, I worked with a district that chose to implement Roots to Resilience in all of their 2nd grade classrooms. So they sent every single 2nd grade teacher my way, and we had the virtual training and prepared them to implement Roots to Resilience as part of their regular sort of classroom lesson plans for social emotional learning. Many times we'll also train health teachers, so that way they can utilize the curriculum under social emotional learning, but also mental health. So the school would again select the grades that would be most appropriate and which educators should be trained. This one we do get more, like I said, teachers and health teachers, although we do sometimes also get counselors, psychologists, different types of support staff. We would prepare them all with a virtual onboarding training. Again, it's a 5-hour training, either done in one 5-hour chunk or in 2.5-hour sessions. And once they are fully trained, they get access to the 5-week curriculum. So this one is 5 weeks. And this one has parent home modules for expanded practice outside of the classroom. And again, we have monthly meetings, so ongoing support from myself and from Good Grief. So again, we're building up the adult relationships, peer support, and adaptive skills of our young people. And this can really change the culture and climate of a school by proactively preparing kids to handle both short-term and more chronic stress in their lives. So they get the opportunity to learn skills that they can take with them anywhere. So they know where and when and how to seek help and how to support not just themselves, but other people as well. And this program looks at values, agency, and decision-making. These are all key skills for our young people to grow and carry with them in their lives. So I'll just pause there. Any questions, wonderings, anything coming up specifically around roots to resilience? The difference between groups and roots. So groups, Good Grief Groups is a grief support program. So it is for students who have experienced the death of someone important in their lives. Roots to Resilience is a broader program. So it's really for any student in a school to learn those adaptive life skills and build up supportive relationships. How many schools are using this particular program? I should have had my numbers with me before I came in, but I can tell you just in the last calendar year, we partnered with over 240 schools using our Good Grief Schools programming in a little over 40 districts. You'd love to do this for a living? Yeah, that'd be fun. I think just doing Roots to Resilience all day. Yes, we do. We work with some private schools, some charter schools. We also take this content, although I'm not so much covering it in this webinar, but we also take this content outside of the school space as well. So we've worked with corporations, we've partnered with other nonprofits where it makes sense for them to train their staff on how to be present for either children, families, or other people who may be facing some kind of grief or loss or adversity. Affinity groups, that I'm not sure. Mostly this gets implemented during classroom time, but not to say that it couldn't be done either in a before or after school affinity group. I don't know of anyone separating out the kids by any of their demographics for affinity groups. Usually with Good Grief Groups, the only requirement is that they have experienced a death. And with Roots to Resilience, the school determines who would be the best group to receive it. I would just say that if you are implementing either of these two curriculum, you keep the groups the same because they want to have the opportunity to really form and norm as a group and build that comfort and trust and safety. Because we know kids, they appreciate it when things are predictable, when they have routines. It helps build that safety, that warmth, so that way they can really deepen their sharing, because these programs, while they start a little bit more with the icebreakers and the getting to know you in that first session, it does get a little deeper as they go along and with their comfort with each other. So that would be my recommendation, that whatever group you choose to receive, either Good Grief Groups or Roots to Resilience, you try to keep it at least consistent. Yes, someone could join after you've already started. That's okay. We have a protocol that you can use to sort of integrate them in. But largely try to keep them the same. Should one start with Roots first and then move to grief support? I think it really depends on the needs of your school and what it is that you're trying to do. There's not one that I would recommend you do first. Yeah, so if you feel that you have a population of students who's experiencing a lot of grief and might benefit from grief support, then that's probably the way that it would go. But if you're trying to do more broadly, then Roots to Resilience would be my recommendation. And some schools do both. They just train different staff to use it in different ways. So for the student grief groups, the loss is by death, yes. So when we're talking about those other adversities like exposure to abuse, divorce, loss of home, things like that, that doesn't necessarily fall under the model for Good Grief Groups, although they might benefit from some kind of targeted support for their particular types of loss. That isn't necessarily covered by that program. Although if I had to pick a program for them, I would say Roots to Resilience would probably support them a little bit better. So I'm just going to watch the time here, but I would say, so what if you feel that it's really your staff that would benefit either from all speaking the same grief and trauma informed language or by building up their skills? Then we would have to talk about professional development. So this is training for the whole faculty on grief informed practices to support students. There was a nationwide New York Life Foundation survey, and they found that 93% of educators agree that childhood grief is a serious problem and deserves more attention in school. And only 15% said that they feel very comfortable addressing students' emotional needs. So that includes anxiety, grief, and or trauma that have been caused or maybe even intensified by the pandemic. Whoops, I went too far. So these workshops are delivered virtually. They range from about 1 to 2 hours, although they can be expanded out to a full day experience. Typically, it's about 1 to 2 hours. We have our one baseline session that I'll talk about in a moment, but some schools will also elect to do a series of staff training. And again, this is all virtual. This all happens on Zoom, or if a district has another preferred platform. So our most frequently requested is that first one there, because it really covers all the baseline knowledge, the lenses that are needed to do the work, and that shared vocabulary and language. So that is supporting students through loss and adversity, to help faculty to understand the impact of loss and adversity and how to support their students. Building resilience, support starts with you. That one is a faculty reflection. There's support and there's this discussion-based workshop, and it creates that space for the adults in the building to examine their own relationship to loss and start to build up some self-awareness. So really important when you're doing this work. We have one that's based on empathy and compassion. So it's all about how to respond empathically with your interpersonal interactions, either with colleagues or with students or families. We have a workshop that's focused just on building up the key social emotional learning skills for young people. We have understanding the needs of students. So that's a deeper dive into understanding grief and loss, but this one's through a child development lens. We have a grief response workshop. This is not one that we do very often, but when there has been a death in a school and the school is looking for a very small breakout session to facilitate processing for the staff, so not for young people, but for the staff, there's a possibility that we could step in to help and support. Although we are probably not the best people for the immediate aftermath of a death in your school community, we're more for those long-term structural supports that are there to sort of change your overall culture, your climate, and your support of grieving students or students who are facing some kind of adversity or loss. And then we have understanding grief and loss. That's a workshop that's more focused on bereavement and bereavement theories. And that one's really geared towards counselors and social workers. So each bullet, yes, is a separate 1 to 2 hour, usually about 1 hour workshop that we can do with school staff. That first bullet being the one that we do the most. That one actually ties really, really well in with good grief groups and roots to resilience. So I will have schools that will bring on good grief groups and then have the whole staff go through supporting students through loss and adversity. So everyone's kind of starting from the same place and they understand what direction the school is trying to move in with their support. Other questions about professional development? We're always happy to meet with the school and figure out a plan that might work best for them. Because we know and recognize that every school, every community, every group of adults even is different and might have different needs. So we are missing a major piece of any school community, and that is the caregivers. So parent and caregiver education, this is the final and one of the most important pieces, I think, of our whole community approach. When you think about it, kids, they spend significant time at school and significant time at home. So it makes sense for all of the adults in their lives to be speaking that same grief-informed language. So by running our virtual sessions in the evening, we're able to bring relevant grief and resilience education and information to the adults in their homes. So by engaging school staff and caregivers, we really have a fully rounded out approach to support. And this isn't to say that schools don't just bring us on to do either just parent education or just staff PD. It's whatever the school feels is most needed at the time, because really you are the experts in your own communities. And again, this is about 1 to 2 hours, usually on a weekday evening. We find that sweet spot is Tuesday through Thursday. with parents. Mondays and Fridays, we don't always get great turnout, but we would help you by generating a registration link on Zoom, putting it into a flyer, and you could push it out. No, the parents wouldn't have to pay. Usually the school pays a flat fee for up to a certain amount of registrants. You know, we don't like it to go over, I think, 100, and then it starts to get really chaotic. But yes, typically the schools are the ones that that would cover the cost for the evening session. Oh, I'm sorry, a TOT, a TOT. I'll be fully transparent. That is not registering. Oh, train the trainer. Oh, for parent and caregiver, no, typically we are the ones that then train the parents. Are there programs for parents to attend at the center in Morristown or online? We do have a resilient parenting series, so keep your eye out for that from the program side of Good Grief. So for Good Grief parents and the broader community and part of our advocacy, yes. And we also have some things that are already on our YouTube channel. So I'll make sure I'll talk about that, all focused around resilient parenting, raising resilient children, and supporting grievers in your lives. Cost for parents with the webinars are always free, but anything that's being run by the school. So if a school decides to have a parent and caregiver education session in the evening, they are the ones that would then cover the cost, and the parents would just be able to register for free. I realized I didn't tell you. Here's some things that we do with parents. I recently worked with a district that had us do all 4 as a series for their parents. So navigating through loss and adversity, very similar to the one that we do with the teachers, but with more of a parent lens than an educator lens, all about raising and empowering resilient children, adaptive skills to build resilience. And then the last one that we do is all about supportive communication practices. Yes, I'm the best contact for setting up school programs, and I will be sure to make sure that you have. I'm going to put it in the chat. That is me, Evelyn at good-grief.org. Let me pull up this slide. So we have a ton of free resources. Just want to make sure you're aware of it. good-grief.org/resources. Our YouTube channel is full of every single webinar we've ever done, our resilient parenting series, all sorts of great information. And just remember, I'm Evelyn with 2 N's at good-grief.org. Evelyn with 1 N is probably will just bounce back. But I just want to pause because I'm really getting towards the end here, and I want to make sure I answer all your questions, tell you about some upcoming events. And I told you we were going to do closing ritual, so I can't just kick you off the webinar. I want to make sure that we transition together in a way. So any other questions that you might have, if you think of them afterwards, please email me. I'm always happy to hear from you. I'm always happy to field questions. If you have contacts at your school that you think it would make sense for me to set up a meeting with, always happy to do sort of a presentation to them about what the options could be and send them, a proposal and hopefully become partners. Oh, the grief support groups per session, it depends on the age. The younger students, the elementary is more in that 35 to 45 minute. But when you get to the older students, they can go up to an hour. There is some wiggle room. So if you have a school that maybe only has a class period that's about 50 or 55 minutes, there are parts that can be sent home with the kids for homework. So little flexibility, but generally with the kids, 35 to 45 for the little guys. And for the older ones, for the grief support groups, about an hour. Will you be able to view the slides? Yeah, we can make that happen. We're also going to upload this whole presentation onto YouTube so you can watch it again or share it with anyone that you think might benefit from learning more about what Good Grief Schools is all about. Yes, for all of the Good Grief Schools programs, they are fee for service. Unlike our centers, our nights of support for our children and family are completely free and unlimited. But for the Good Grief groups and Roots to Resilience, PD and the parent and caregiver education, those are costs that either come from the school budget, grants, ESSER funding, things like that. Yeah, of course. Yeah, reach out to me. I'm happy to send along a quote or some information. Roots to Resilience, very, very similar. The 9th through 12th is probably the ones that would run about that 60-minute. And then with the younger students, anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. The middle school and the high school Roots to Resilience also have PowerPoint presentations as well to sort of help with the visual aids, because they do have a little bit more of the conversation base and story sharing. The little guys have a lot more doing. It does go all the way down to kindergarten. So we have a K through 2 curriculum for Roots to Resilience, and then an elementary, which is K through 5 for Good Grief groups. I already showed you that slide, but again, lots of great resources. Reach out to me. I definitely want to hear from you after this. Yes, 6 through 8, and you're not experiencing any crankiness. That's awesome. 6 through 8 is for Good Grief groups lumped in with the 9th through 12th. So 6 through 12 is its own curriculum for the grief groups, and then K through 5 is a separate curriculum for the grief groups. But then with Roots to Resilience, it's further honed in: K through 2, 3 to 5, 6 through 8, and then 9 through 12. I just want to make sure you're aware of some things that are coming up. Be sure to go to good-grief.org/events. We have our Good Grief Spring Institute, which is going to be all about adverse childhood experiences. So we're going to be focused on ACEs. It's Saturday, March 19th, full day and in person at the Pingree School here in New Jersey. In March, we'll be celebrating SEL Day on March 11th. We have a lot of tours coming up in our centers. So we'd love to see you. I mean, we're so happy that you're here learning more about schools, but there's so many other things that we do in person and virtually. And we want to get to know you and spend some time with you and see how we can support you and your community. So check it out, good-grief.org/events. So we had our opening ritual, and of course we're going to have a closing ritual. And you know what, I should also give you our survey. Let's see, because I want to see how things went for you all. You know, did you learn anything? Is there stuff we could have done a little differently? Oh, it's being cranky. All right. Let me grab it from here. So I'm going to put a survey in here. And if you want to be contacted by us, we would love to hear from you. There's a spot for you to say that you would like some follow-up directly from Good Grief, and we can set up a meeting either with you or with a school or whoever makes sense. And let me just bring up our gratitude slide, because we're going to do a little closing ritual together. And then I'll send you on your way. So we had our opening ritual. Now we're going to do our closing ritual to mark the end of our time here. And we know that gratitude enhances resilience. It's a choice that we can make every day. And again, I know it might feel cheesy. I'm asking you to lean into it, friends. The same way some folks might have rolled their eyes at breathing exercises, but go with me here and give it a shot. You might feel better than when you arrived. And I'll use this to transition you all back into your real lives. So we're just going to take 3 deep breaths and share one thing in the chat that you are grateful for today. So that's 1 breath for me. 2 breaths for me. And 3. And I won't put it in the chat. I will say it out loud. I am grateful to all of you. I'm grateful to our school partners. I'm grateful to our parents, to our supporters, to everyone who is here today. I'm grateful for your time and for your attention, and deep gratitude to be able to do this work and bring all of these wonderful trainings and events to you. So I'll just leave the chat open for a moment. If anyone wants to share one thing you are grateful for today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, waking up, steady income for this session. Oh, thank you. No one found you sitting in a dark room at school during this webinar. That's a win. That's a win, friends. Family, yeah. Yes, thank you. So I hope you continue. Snow day, lucky. We had a delayed opening that delayed it just until the snow started getting bad. So that was fun. So lots of things to be grateful for. I hope you carry the sense of gratitude with you throughout the rest of your day. And I do hope to hear from all of you again very, very soon. Thank you, everyone.